Hello, my name is Tara Squire. I am a professor of health law and the director of the Health Law and Policy Program here at the University of Arizona James E. Rogers College of Law. And I am delighted to be one of the sponsors today to present this webinar to you on medical device development, business planning, and fundraising. Along with University of Arizona College of Law, we're working very closely with the International Society for Translational Cardiovascular Research and also the Arizona Bioindustry Association. So all three entities thought this was a really timely topic to bring to you today, and along with our keynote speaker, Stan Rowe, and panelist, Spencer King. So I want to just briefly cover some of the basic housekeeping items as we begin to launch today's 1 hour show for you. That I will turn it over to our other co-sponsors, and then we'll have about 40 minutes or so of hearing from Stan and Dr. King on business planning and fundraising development. And then we'll also have time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function throughout this event. I'll be taking note and we'll be happy to get to them for the last 10 minutes of the webinar. In addition, this event will be recorded. So if you are watching it not live and have a question and want to email us, please feel free to do so. We'll send the information about how to email us in the chat. And also, if you just want more information about future topics on regulatory science, we'd be happy to explore those as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Joan Kerber-Walker and hear more about the Arizona Bioindustry Association and her work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara, and it's great to be with everyone today. Yes, Arizona is a hotbed for medical device development, and we are so thrilled to have you with us, and also to all of the innovators that are out there who are working to find new treatments and new cures for patients so that they can live longer and more fulfilling lives. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Arizona's bioindustry now has over 1,400 life science companies with a high concentration in medical device. And many of those companies started at the University of Arizona, or at Arizona State University, or in our leading hospital systems, which include Banner Health, which is partnered with the University of Arizona, Dignity Health, which is also partnered with the University of Arizona, and Honor Health. Those three systems serve over 90% of the Arizona population and are benefiting from the innovations that are coming out of our medical device community. Basically, we also kicked off a really exciting partnership this year with the James E. Rogers College of Law at the University of Arizona to meet the needs of the medical device community in a very important sector, regulatory science. And the certificate program in regulatory science, which was developed in partnership with the Critical Path Institute in Tucson, and the James E. Rogers College of Law, is now available to AZ Bio members and, of course, all of the medical device innovators that want to learn more about regulatory science across the country. So we are thrilled to have this partnership. Equally important, Arizona Bioscience Week is coming up in October. It's right around the corner. And we hope that you'll be able to join us for those events. And I'm sure Tara will be able to send you that information later. With that, I'd like to pass the baton to someone who is no stranger to medical innovation. Dr. Nabil Deeb is president and founder of the International Society for Cardiovascular Translational Research and the founder and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Cardiovascular Translation of Research. He is a professor of medicine at the University of Arizona Medical College, and Phoenix Director of Cardiovascular Translation Research at Dignity Health, and Director of Clinical Cardiovascular Cell Therapy at the University of California, San Diego. And we will forgive you for that one. Dr. Deeb is a renowned cardiovascular researcher and doctor. He completed his interventional cardiology fellowship at Harvard Medical School, Beth Israel Deaconess, Medical Center in Boston and continued his education at Harvard School of Public Health. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. D.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joanne, for your kind word. I truly appreciate it. I am very excited and would love to welcome each one of you to this really fascinating webinar series that we are going to do. And we have a very special guest. You will hear from Dr. King shortly, whom he is, to share with us his experience in business planning and fundraising. I also would like to thank the Roger College of Law at the University of Arizona and the AZ Bio for sponsoring this program with the ISCTR. And special thanks to Tara and the tremendous work in putting a unique course at the University of Arizona in relation to medical product development. And thank you also, Joanne, for joining us today. I can guarantee you that you are going to benefit from each of those lecture series. There is a significant gap in our education when it's come to medical product development, whether you are a physician, engineer, pharmacist, or health, or lawyers, and so forth. We definitely need to expand the education in relation to medical product development. As a physicians, we know how to use a product and where to use it, but we rarely are taught on how to develop product. As an engineer, you study the prototyping, the material, but you don't study profoundly the regulatory path, the reimbursement, the unmet clinical need, and so forth. So you are going to find this complex process of medical device development is very challenging. And that's why education in this area is critical if we would have to improve the healthcare of our patients. As you see how complex the process this, from the patient unmet need to the preclinical, clinical evaluation, to the intellectual property, the business planning, the regulatory strategy, reimbursement strategy, and so forth. Currently, with the current educational system and our ability, we have 1 out of 3,000 idea and less than 10% of startup will succeed. And as you see today, I know that Stan is going to address many of the reason of failure of our discovery and our scientific idea. And as a result of that knowledge, we founded the ISCTR in 2007 to address the challenge of medical product development, standardize the process of medical product, what we call today translational pathway for medical and cardiovascular product. And that's how can we expedite the science to patient. With this knowledge, we can save life and decrease cost. And with putting together outstanding governing board and scientific advisory board, we have the collaboration with more than 100 experts from different background, as you see, academia, industry, regulatory, reimbursement guideline, and patients. And finally, I'm so happy to say that you have a tremendous amount of educational material to read and be knowledgeable in the area of innovation. We have an online course on medical device development, online course for cardiovascular device development, ebook on the translational pathway for cardiovascular devices, annual summit journal, and now we have our webinar series, and you will see state-of-the-art lectures today. Happy to say that we're collaborating with many schools, and we completed the course with the University of Arizona, as you heard before, and we are going to the next year to also do the same collaboration. Definitely, I will encourage you to join the ISCTR. It looks like advertisement, but I love this part of advertisement because it's extremely helpful for anyone who wants to participate in innovation. And today you will hear one of those steps in translational medicine. The business planning is critical. As a scientist, you think the idea is the most important. Ideas are cheap as you saw of them, 1 out of 3,000 finally reached the guideline. But the planning for that idea is critical. And you'll hear today from Stan Rowe lectures in regarding to that. I am so happy to say with us today a very unique a person who contributes to the world of cardiovascular medicine almost more than anyone you know. Dr. Spencer King, who is emeritus professor at the Emory University, and he's also the chairman of education of ISCTR. He will be the moderator and the panelist for these sessions, and he will be introducing Stan Rowe, who's also one of our governing board member of the ISCTR and contributes significantly to our mission. So I'm glad that both of them is here. Dr. King.
Thank you, Nabil. Nabil, you've done a masterful job of outlining the goals of the ISCTR, which in brief are to move ideas all the way from their conception to utilization in patients. And I'm here mainly to introduce and also to help with the questions at the end. I'm an interventional cardiologist. I've been involved in it since the beginning. And I've observed a lot of developments, and some of the most dramatic developments have occurred at the hands of our speaker today. Stan Rowe is the CEO of NXT Biomedical, which is a medical incubator company. And he comes to that after retiring from being CEO of Percutaneous Valve Technologies and the chief scientific officer and vice president for advanced technologies for Edwards Life Sciences. And his experience there, I think you'll hear a lot about in this presentation of how really a brilliant idea has moved through the complex process that Nabil has told you about. Prior to this career of Stan's, he has a long and illustrious career with many leading roles. One of the most interesting to me, being an interventional cardiologist, was he headed up Johnson & Johnson interventional systems stent development, which was, of course, another dramatically successful project. So Stan, we're all here to hear you, so let's not take up any more time.
Spencer, thank you so much for the very kind introduction. I hope you guys can hear me okay. I'm going to share my screen here and some slides. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
There we go. So I want to start off with why do we just have a 10% success rate that Dr. Deeb was talking about? And I would say most non-iterative medical device products fail because, well, they're not technical failures. We can figure out whether things work or don't work fairly easily. I think most of it is a lack of understanding of market dynamics and competition. Also, there's a failure to understand kind of the complex regulatory reimbursement that's required in domestic and international markets. Many times product definition lacks sufficient differentiation from the standard of care and performance. Either in reality or in perception. Perception matters. You know, how people perceive a product has a lot to do with whether they will try it or not. And then the definition is not contemporaneous, that you're defining markets for today and not for the 3, 4, 5 years out when you're actually going to be launching them. So we have to think about, well, this is going to exist not in today's marketplace, but in a marketplace that's a little different from where today is. And what does that look like? Where are the trends heading, so I can think that through? Some of the other failures I've seen many times, manufacturing cost, complexity, and quality, make it impossible to really make a product of high quality and performance, a lack of distribution strength, and insufficient cash for milestone achievement with contingencies. So how do you avoid these kind of failures? I mean, a lot of this has to do with how do I plan and how do I finance my startup? Well, it's always going to start with understanding customer requirements. But who is your customer, right? We have a lot of customers. We have patients, physicians, hospitals, purchasing, nurses, payers, regulators. And then we have a process for how we frequently define those customer requirements. And I hope you're familiar with it. It's called a Biodesign process, came out of Stanford Biodesign. And it's pretty well adopted through med tech development. And so here's kind of the process that they utilize, which is identify, invent, and implement. And the question is, when are you doing this planning and financing? Just when I'm thinking about the needs, or when I'm doing concept generation, or, you can see this number 5, strategy development, and then business planning. Number 6 is more the implementation. But I've got a lot of work to do in terms of identifying this product, defining it well, and providing a solution that's proprietary before I get to this planning and financing stage. So here's kind of the more detailed plan in Biodesign. And if you look through this, there's, an awful lot of work that has to occur before I get to this stage. I need to know what this product is and define its performance requirements before I start laying down what the financing and planning side looks like, all the way down in step 6 here, if you look. So where are the funds coming from for those first steps? How do I fund this concept search and selection process? And I would say, what is it I'm trying to accomplish here? And I always say, there's this thing I grew up with called the new product schism. And that is, marketing can always define a product that R&D can't build. And R&D can always build a product that marketing can't sell. How do I make that compromise in a way that creates value for patients? Not so easy. And how often is it that the perfectly defined product is feasible and practical? So, that's what this process is designed to do. At NXT, I'll share with you, this is kind of the process that we utilize. We do that formal need identification and product definition, and then we bring in what's called safe funding, which is a convertible note to fund that later development stage. And we do detailed development, and we spin out kind of Series A companies. So we take things through a feasibility process. And here's kind of some of the timelines that we utilize, but this is for us, right? And we try to do things that tend to be more disruptive. And so they maybe cost a little more, they take a little more time in terms of doing market research and understanding things than maybe more iterative development takes. And then we have kind of the must-haves and the nice-to-haves. And again, this is something we've personalized. Your list may be different, but you need to have a list, right? Not having a list is not acceptable. So you need to figure out, how am I going to rank these things? And how do I think about how my product performs in this? And if I haven't thought through all these things, then I'm not really ready for planning or financing. And we give this a quantitative list because we're developing multiple projects. And so we want to have priorities. And so that's especially relevant if you're working in a company that's developing multiple projects. You want to know what the priorities are. And so we utilize this kind of system to do that. So where do these inputs come from? Well, come from a lot of different areas. They come from experts in the field. That can mean physicians, it can mean biomedical engineers, it can mean researchers. Good ideas can come from a lot of different places. If you're somebody with a good idea, though, I would say one of the most important things to do is to give it away. And what I mean by that is trying to protect your idea and not bringing capable people into developing it means it will probably never see the light of day. You need a group of people, right? I say invention is a single person sport. Product development and innovation is a team sport. So I understand that you may have a unique idea and as the inventor, and you deserve lots and lots of credit for that. But the more you try to protect it and not bring in a capable team of people, it's not going to happen. So experts and innovators, and especially inventors, please think about that. Many times you need formal market research, although we'll talk about some of the pitfalls of that sometimes. But that means going out and really talking to users. And you can do that very informally, kind of at a qualitative level, and then many times you have to do that more quantitatively. It takes a lot of experience, I think, as you'll see that there's a very broad range of skill sets required to do this kind of innovation. And there's a lot of planning and refinement. You're not going to get it right the first time. You have to think of it as a living document. The product development process, however you want to lay it out, it's not going to be right. We have to do a lot of early feasibility testing and multiple prototype development before we get to something that is probably the product we want to develop. And then we have to kind of test it for commercial viability, right? Just because someone will fund something, by the way, doesn't mean that it's commercially viable. I've seen a whole lot of things that have been funded by venture capital that really were not very good ideas. So you really have to continuously test your product against the standard of care and competition to know whether it's commercially viable. I think I said earlier, 1 in 10, maybe 2 in 10 medical device developments are commercially viable that VCs develop. And these are supposedly the experts in early stage development. They know a great team, they know a good idea when they see it. But boy, it's really hard for even them to pick. It takes a lot of perseverance and adaptability in this process because, again, you're going to run into roadblocks and you have to be adaptive in this process. There is, when you're doing disruptive development, a very huge first mover advantage. You kind of get to set the stage for new technologies, but you do have a higher risk because it's not like you can follow somebody else's pathway. Iterative development, of course, is less risky, but it's also more commercially challenging because that competitive standard is moving much faster than if you're doing disruptive development. And of course, I think the more focused we are on patient benefits, the better we define products that will ultimately serve them. Before I get into some of the details about planning and financing, I'll give you a little bit of an example in that, these are the drawings that Dr. Cribier brought to me when he had the idea to develop a percutaneously delivered heart valve to treat aortic stenosis, which is a narrowing of the aortic valve that happens in patients that are typically 70, 80 years old. You like any of these drawings? Which ones work? Which ones don't work? What materials do you use? How do you test it? How do you prototype it? How do you know it's durable? You know, we had a lot of engineering questions. A lot of them were the what's called boundary conditions. What are the compressive forces that a frame has to resist when I put it in the aortic valve? How strong do I have to make this so that it's circular? Because if it's not circular, it will fail early. How do we manufacture a frame that large? No tubing existed for it. What material is preferred for that frame? And how do we attach a fixed diameter valve to an expandable and collapsible frame? No one's ever done that. How do you make an attachment durable? How do you seal around this valve so that I don't get leakage around it? What's the optimal valve design for hemodynamics and profile and tissue damage? And then what's the optimal valve material? Do I use polymers or copolymers or tissue? And how long does it take you to answer these questions? If I don't have this list of questions, how do I plan? And then I have these other product and market definitions. How long does this valve need to last? And then how large a diameter can it be and still be safe? What is the best way to deliver it? Which blood vessel do I use? Which patients will clinically benefit? How do I prove safety and efficacy in a clinical trial? Will hospitals pay enough for this to justify the R&D cost? Everybody needs to ask that question. Are there enough patients who do not get surgery to justify those R&D costs? Because this is going to be a device that doesn't require open heart surgery the way the standard of care existed at that time. So guess what? I went to the experts in this field to answer these questions, the cardiothoracic surgeons. And what did the cardiothoracic surgeons, the experts in valvular heart disease, say about this percutaneously delivered heart valve? One that I would put in a cath lab instead of in a surgical suite. They said, you can't take a valve and crip it down to a smaller size. You'll damage it. It won't work. And then we use 30 sutures to hold a valve in place. You're going to use 0. It'll never be stable. And you can't open aortic stenosis, this narrowing of the aortic valve. It's a rock. We take this out surgically. It's a calcific disease. You'll never be able to open it up. It's too rigid. And even if you tried to do it, this calcific disease would fragment and every patient would have a stroke. And even if you could make something like this, it would be inferior to surgical valves that have been developed over 30 years. And you can't make something like that durable. Well, how's that for a reception from the world's leading experts in valvular heart disease? Would you quit your job as a vice president to go develop this? Or maybe that's like the blind men and the elephant. They see one side of this picture. They don't see the whole side. Well, of course, we kind of, know better. By the way, cardiologists, they said, they don't know anything about this disease and know how to stay out of it. Well, we know we can crimp a valve down to very small size. Embolization of valves is not a problem. We can always open up a diseased valve. Stroke risk is equal to or lower than surgery. Transcatheter valves are superior in performance to surgical valves. In hemodynamics, they're durable for way longer than 5 years. Cardiologists have learned and treated aortic stenosis disease around the world. So sometimes your idea, the more disruptive it is, may not be met with great enthusiasm, depending upon who you're asking this question to. In this case, the experts. And by the way, they're, for the large part, these objections were not disingenuous. They were just the experience of surgery. And in fact, what I could do is make a plan that says, I need to address all these things and be able to answer them. That's part of my charter in planning. By the way, let's go back and ask, what do patients want from your former institution, Spencer from Emory. Least invasive option. Guess what? They don't really want open heart surgery. Who does? No surgical incision? Of course not. Return to normal activity quickly? Of course, I don't want to spend 6 months recuperating. Least amount of morbidity? Guess what? Open heart surgery has a lot of morbidity. Decreased pain, decreased or no ICU stay and short hospitalization. Well, that's easy to understand. And guess what? Transcatheter valves can deliver that, and it's important to patients. So when I think about planning, the first question at some level is, how do I address the key feasibility and performance questions? This is about risk reduction. What is it that can go wrong? How do I prove that this fundamental thing I can do and it'll perform? Now, I always say there are two fundamental questions. There's, does it work? And does it work well enough? Does it work is a little easier. It's kind of binary. Yeah, I think I can make it work. Does it work well enough is a little harder. It's, does it work well enough to really help patients, to perform well in a clinical trial, to have an enthusiastic reception on the part of payers and physicians? And then, how do I most effectively compare this product versus a standard of care? I have to address medical economics today. That's just a part of what we have to do. I need to assemble a diverse, capable, and experienced team. I have to create a compelling story. I have to have thoughtful plans and a targeted funding audience. I have to explain what risks that I understand and how I'm going to address them. You put together a plan and you don't explain the risks, it sounds like you don't really know what they are. Now, the funding options, of course, you have early on are angels, or wealthy individuals, and sometimes angel groups are part of that. They kind of sometimes create their own venture capital firms. Then there's kind of formal venture capital, family offices, grants, and then strategics, companies that can help fund your development. Your partners really do matter. I used to drive the HR group crazy at Edwards because I had a very simple policy, and it was just no assholes. Okay, there are a lot of smart people out there. Okay, but it just takes one asshole to screw up a whole team. So you need to look at your team carefully, not just for their IQ, but for their EQ, that you need a team that can work and function well together. So think about not just what they can bring, but what their attitudes are like and their values are like. And that doesn't mean everybody should look alike, by the way. Diverse teams perform much better than teams that all look the same. And I always figure if I hire people that are just like me, one of us is redundant, right? So I need people that have different skill sets. Choose your board carefully. Who you have on your board of directors, they're basically your boss, and they really input strategy considerably. So you need a very experienced, thoughtful board. You have to choose your financial partners carefully because you're going to be with them for years, not just the easy money you can get, but people who can be with you for the long term. And then your clinical regulatory partners as well. Typical financing stages are feasibility, planning, preclinical to about less than 10 patients, 2 to 3 million. Now, a lot of this has to do with whether it's a 510K product, kind of a more iterative product, or something like a de novo or a PMA product will have a big impact on this range. Early feasibility studies or pilot trials are in the $3 to $8 million range. Pivotal studies of a 510K with clinicals or de novo, maybe 8 to 20 million. And then pivotal studies from like a PMA, a pre-market application, $35 to $50 million. These are not unusual numbers. The average cost to bring a medical device to market through 510K pathway is $31 million, and for a PMA is $94 million in total raise. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of money to bring something through these processes. Key traps. It always takes longer and costs more than you think. It's inevitable. It's interesting. You don't want to be too pessimistic because no one wants to invest in a 10-year plan. Your product development process just looks unattractive. But you also don't want to say everything's going to work perfectly the first time. And so you need to plan for iteration and plan to adapt. Many randomized trials have failed, by the way, due to control groups behaving differently than expected. So even when you plan well, you can't always assume that control groups behave the way the literature states. You have to have something very contemporaneous that will help you succeed in randomized trials. And there's a lot of graveyards of new devices because of this single fact. Regulatory authorities are unpredictable, especially for novel therapies and devices. That percutaneous heart valve that I developed, the FDA, in all of their judgment, decided to put the regulatory review for the percutaneous heart valve, a device that cardiologists are going to use. They put it in the cardiothoracic surgical branch for review. And of course, they created every obstacle they could think of for us to develop that product. So sometimes it can be a tough road to follow. And again, you need to explain what risks you understand and how you plan to address them. I've seen so many business plans that don't really list the risks. It kind of makes you think you don't understand what they are. So put significant effort into a compelling PowerPoint with a very good executive summary of your opportunity. The need, explain the standard of care, kind of the outcomes you're looking for, and the economics. Explain why you have a proprietary solution. Put together an efficient plan for development, what your team looks like, and the finances around the opportunity. You need to find a great venture capital partner, and I wish there was a simple way to do it, but it's kissing frogs. It's the best way to describe it. You just have to go out and do the work. You can do some characterization, but at the end of the day, you're just going to call up a lot of people and talk to a lot of people to get funding. Reputation, team connections, and board connections really help. They can make a lot of introductions into venture capital, and that gives you a little bit of a leg up. And I would say your entire team needs to be steeped in these three basic components. You need to be experts in the medical practice, in biomedical engineering, and in the business of medical device development. It's the three-legged stool we all stand upon. You know, a product development team, a group of engineers, they make 1,000 decisions in a year about your product. And if they don't understand the standard of care, they don't understand how medicine is practiced, what the procedure looks like, what the imaging is like, or how competitive products perform, how are they going to make a product that's competitive and acceptable to the clinicians? So you need a broad set of skills to be effective at this. We serve patients. Value is created by improving outcomes and costs. The planning and the financing require a broad range of knowledge in medicine, biomedical engineering, and business processes to create a credible plan. Choosing partners in development and financing is crucial to success. Many plans are overly optimistic, but can also be too pessimistic. You have to thread that needle carefully so that you have time to really develop, because you get really far behind, people lose credibility, and you don't want to do that with your board or your financiers. Partnership between biomedical engineering and physicians is an incredibly powerful engine that creates significant innovations that serves patients. I always like to end talking about patients. This is a patient I met at a dinner in New York City. He's the guy in the middle is 99 years old. He had received a percutaneously delivered heart valve about 2 months before I met him. And that's his grandson just to his right. The guy on the far right was my venture capital partner, Yuval Benur. And I heard the grandson say to his grandfather, "Hey, God, Granddad, it's 10 o'clock at night. You got to be exhausted. Why don't I take you home?" And his grandfather said, "No, I'm having a great time. I'll make it home by myself. You go on alone." And I thought, well, this guy is doing great. And this guy was a Holocaust survivor. These are the patients we serve, and it's a great privilege for us to serve them and to help them and provide alternatives to, in this case, open heart surgery, or maybe he would have received nothing at that age. So it's just great to meet these patients and know that we're doing something that benefits them and their families. So with that, I thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Stan. That certainly lays it out, and I think it does create a lot of questions we'd like to ask you about. I would, on the operational side, how do we, who's going to manage the questions in the chat? I mean, you can raise your hand, I know that, but who's going to have a look at it?
Yeah, if I could interject, if anyone has a question, the attendees to use the Q&A to ask a question. Chat is disabled. It's just for us to send out information to the participants. And I have a few questions after you, Dr. T, if in case it's quiet from the floor.
No, I have a lot of questions. I'm happy to entertain yours, but let me just start one off. Stan, for the person starting out at the very beginning of this process, and we've looked at, and Nabil has put this all together so we see how extensive it is. How much should you be aware of all the problems that are going to come way down the road before even trying to start the first part of the road? In other words, can you do people get discouraged when they see I've got to raise 50 million, 100 million, I got to get to this, that, even if they've got a good idea, is it, where should how far along the road should the person think before they get going with the team?
Well, I think professional investors, especially, I mean, maybe for angel investors, they may not be thinking that far out, although you see a lot of very sophisticated angel investors. Certainly venture capital are going to want to know how you're thinking about medico-economics, what kind of regulatory process you're going to go through, and at least how you think about it. You don't have to be detailed about it. I don't think, if you have to do a PMA, I don't think you have to say, here's what my trial looks like, Spencer. But to be able to say, we recognize if we get through this feasibility trial and our first in human and that looks good, we ultimately are going to have to go through a PMA process that's probably going to require a randomized trial.
Sure.
I don't think you have to go into much more detail, so you don't have to go into the risks of that randomized trial, but you have to be able to elucidate what that process looks like.
Well, you said some things that weren't terribly flattering about the FDA and your experience with the valve. But my understanding and experience is that whatever it is, if the FDA has to rule on it, it's always a good idea to get them involved early on. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I absolutely do. And by the way, the FDA, I would say the FDA was embarrassed by the process that they put PVT through. And it was one of the reasons why they generated and came up with this early feasibility process. And I can tell you, they've become much, much better partners with us in development. So I'm glad you bring that up, Spencer, because they're not the enemy. They are one of your partners in the development process, and you have to treat them that way. Even when they ask you questions that you think are not relevant or difficult or whatever, I think that you have to see them as a partner and respect their opinion. And, you know, they're trying to do the best to protect the public from unsafe devices and to ensure that what we develop is safe and effective. And so they have very, very good intentions, and they're much better partners than they were when we started PBT. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think they've learned things from both the stint process and this, of course, they've learned a lot. Tara, why don't I take a break from asking questions and let you handle some?
Sure, thank you. Well, I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. It was thorough and personal and very practical and helpful. I have just a question, my own question, and I'll take one from the floor. But you know, you talk quite a bit about this, the team, the optimal team in this process, but you don't. But if you could give a little more detail regarding sort of like the range of people and the particular skills that you're describing, I think that might be pretty helpful because that's such a critical piece of what you've been talking about.
Sure. Well, I think, you know, again, there's no substitute for experience. It's kind of, I think it's, if you can bring in people that have been through this process once or twice, really, really important. But remember, I guess, several things. One is the core is always typically in med device development, biomedical engineering talent. Okay. So having people that have expertise in that field, but it can be much more specialized than that. Like in developing a percutaneous heart valve, you had to have experience in both, you know, fatigue testing, you know, how are we going to do valve testing, and then delivery system stuff. And so imaging and delivery system. So a lot of it depends upon what the product is. You may need electrical engineering support, more mechanical engineering support. You'd like to have people who've done things in animal studies, which are typically required. And, you know, I have very mixed feelings about animal studies. I ran the animal lab at Edwards Life Sciences, and it's a great place to prove safety. It's not a very good place to prove efficacy. You can learn a lot about procedural development. It's frequently required, but sometimes not very helpful. And so many times in silico type of modeling or benchtop modeling or cadaveric work can frequently be much more valuable in the early stages of development than animal studies. But and if you were listening carefully, what you heard a lot about is also marketing and reimbursement. And so when you think about that team, right, who's representing the market there? I'm not saying you have to have a full-time marketing person, but if you don't have somebody who is representing who that market is and what the marketplace looks like, if it's just a bunch of biomedical engineers huddling together every day, you can talk way too much about product and not enough about what patients need and what physicians need.
That's great. Thank you. Actually, my second question ties into it. It also aligns with the one from the floor. But it seems also when you're dealing with such a large volume of money and a great deal of time, you're managing risk as well. And I thought that slide you showed with the criteria and the scoring was really interesting. And I think what might help is to hear a little bit more about how you apply that scoring sheet with your team and the process, especially as the product goes along and there could be something you weren't expecting, the randomized trial fails, you know, it takes longer than you thought. How you manage risk, where that scorecard comes into it, and how you apply it. Those kinds of details would be great to hear about.
Stan, can you put that slide up? Is it possible to put that slide of the scoring system up? And it might help with Tara's if it's hard to do, we can skip that. But
No, it should be easy enough.
I had an idea about that too. Tara, when you were looking at that, did the score numbers make sense to you? Do you think?
Just the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I was struck about some of these. You get a lot of points up here at the top, patient benefit, and then you get a lot of points if no trial needed. I thought of an example there. What if you were Earl Bakken and you developed a pacemaker and you said, well, the patient benefit will be easy. The heart stops, the pacemaker starts it. Clinical trials needed. I need one patient to put it in, and I'll show that it beats. You got a pretty good product going there.
Yeah, so I think
not many things are going to be that easy, I think, to get a high score.
Right. But I think, so again, this is our criteria. And it kind of says, look, if I have to do a 500 patient trial to demonstrate clinical benefit, then it tells me, one, the benefit is probably pretty small to require that kind of N, or I don't know the patient population that's benefited. Neither of those is a good place to be, right? So if the patient benefit is actually very high, I need a very small clinical trial, because the difference between my control group and my performance is going to be great. And so I could do a very efficient clinical trial. So those two things are related to one another. And maybe you get a double benefit if you have a big patient benefit, right? What other? So
did you have questions about this score system?
I was just sort of wondering how you implement it. So is it something that you do in yourself, and then you have team members review, or is it an iterative process where you can continue to revisit it throughout?
So my team goes through this, and again, we have multiple projects, and so one of the things this is useful for is kind of priority setting, but it's also something I can share with my board and say, here's how our projects are rating, and it kind of shows them where some of the risks are and some of the benefits are, right? It tells them we're thinking about all of these issues. And in some respects, it's a board level view of a project, because it says, gee, I mean, there's some things you really want. If I'm going to invest in this, I want to know there's a marketplace that's large enough. I want to make sure that it's proprietary, of a strong IP position. I can do proof of principle without it costing me a fortune, right? That, there's a big benefit to the stakeholders, and if I need to license it, can I license it on terms that make sense? And then the rest of it can be, kind of nice to have. So some of these may be stronger than others, but it helps differentiate the others. All of them have to perform at the top level, right? The must-haves.
That's very helpful. Thank you. That was just my question. You answered it. How you use it, how it's implemented. Dr. King, did you have any other questions or comments?
There's some two questions from the audience, I guess, Tara.
Oh, sure. Well, I was sort of, yeah, you guys can see that as well. But I thought we'd I used the risk question looking at the criteria. I thought that was a very good one. And I imagine you can speak to it, but I imagine you revisit it and consider it with your other priorities, whether you continue to pursue that particular product. And then there's another question about breakthrough device pathways, which would have helped PVT.
I'm sorry, what was around what? The
breakthrough device pathways?
Yeah, so breakthrough designation is, one is obviously it will help you with financing the company, but more especially is it guarantees you some CMS coverage for the first several years and kind of a priority review at FDA. So those are really nice things. Now, I don't know how that priority review really translates into a faster review, but it kind of says you're probably going to get some priority over if you didn't have breakthrough, which is good. But I think most importantly, having reimbursement right off the top is huge. It means once I get an approval, I can immediately launch the product. And that's different from many, many other medical devices where you have to go through maybe a year of work with CMS before you get any kind of reimbursement, which can be feel like a very, very long time.
Stan, would you go take your share screen off so we can see you better?
Sure.
While you're doing it, it's often that the person with the best idea may be the least famous person around. Maybe somebody that's really just you don't expect to have the idea, and they really do. And in fact, the less they've been around, maybe the less inhibited they are to come up with a new idea. Having said that, and thinking for the business plan and the fundraising that has to happen, I'm reminded of what some people have told me that when they're deciding whether to invest in something, they bet on the jockey, not the horse. The horse being the idea, the jockey being who? The inventor, but also maybe the people the inventor has brought in. In other words, how important is it to, if you're gonna try to develop something, how important is it? I think you said this, but the team, if the inventor themselves are not well known and have a track record of inventing things and commercializing things, how important is it that they surround themselves with people who have had those kind of successes?
Well, I think the venture capital community would tell you they bet on a team before they bet on an idea. So a great team can take a moderately good idea and make it an amazing product, right? And sometimes things that I would think would never succeed have succeeded because of a great team. And you see them, great teams will also pivot when they run into problems. And sometimes they pivot into something much better than the original idea. And so I think venture capital especially bets on a team ahead of a good idea.
I know I've been on road shows where the questions all had to do with the size of the market and the speed to the market, and the issue at hand is hardly understood by the people, at least the big investment firms. We had one dealing with restenosis and finished this all up, and they rushed through all these presentations. Leaving the room, a couple of the principal people come over to me and say, "Now, what is restenosis?"
Yeah,
that's after they've decided whether to invest or not.
What is it we're investing in again? Yeah, but that again, that supports the fact that they're betting on this team, even though they don't thoroughly understand the problem. But I do think it's incumbent upon us to be able to explain these really complex things in a way that anyone can understand them. And that's part of the effort you put into putting these presentations together, and the kind of virtual video that people put together now to explain their procedures, and being able to really explain what the patient journey is like. All those things are really, really helpful in having people really understand what the fundamental problems are and challenges.
That's actually the perfect note to end our webinar on. Thank you so much, Stan and Spencer King, and to our host, Joan and Nabil. I think this is one of the best webinars we've had to date. It was really fantastic. And just for those who are interested, this is something that we are developing in the course that we do with ISCTR at the College of Law. And if we'll put details in the chat if you have questions or want more information about anything that you heard today or any future webinars to come, we'd be happy to tailor them to something that would be of interest to you. And with that, I just want to give my thanks, and I hope to see all of you again in a future virtual or in-person platform. I really appreciate your time, and I learned a lot today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.